Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're hailing from. Welcome to another edition of In the Clouds. I am Chris Short, executive producer of OpenShift TV. I am joined by the one and only Stu Miniman. Stu, how are you doing today?
Chris, I'm doing fantastic. I have not been getting up quite as early as everybody for the European KubeCon show, so I'll probably look a little bit more bright-eyed than you do right now. But no, thank you for joining, having me on, and great, my inaugural guest slot on OpenShift TV. So super
Yeah, this is
excited
your
to be
first
here.
time. It's really
Yeah.
surprising, like given your experience and background, right? Like if you don't mind, before we get into all that, I have to ask you a very important question.
Okay.
Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
Is cheesecake a cake or a pie?
Oh, so it's one of those kind of shows, is it, Chris? Um,
Might be.
all right. So, look, we love to have these debates in our industry. I personally try not to, I lived through the Great Cloud Wars. I have the
Mhm.
scars to do it. So I do hate arguing semantics and everything. That being said, I am a fan of the Oxford comma. If you want to,
As am I. Yeah.
if you say on premise, I will,
Ooh, I'll correct
think
you.
less of
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
there. So, look, we have to understand what defines these things. So, cake is one of these, stupid words like cloud. It doesn't mean a whole lot.
Right.
Is a crab cake a cake? So is cheesecake a cake? Well, it's in the name, so it's one of those funny things like, everything that for a while, and I would grow in my garden, and I say, oh, look at these wonderful vegetables. And you go look up the ontology, and you're like, what the heck? Cucumbers, tomatoes, and all these things are all fruits. And did you know a strawberry isn't actually a berry? So, it's these things that you look at, and you say, okay, so is cheesecake a cake? Not by the classic definition. There's really not, it doesn't have the composition of a cake.
Right.
Is it a pie? Well, pie is traditionally really related to the crust, and it really kind of fails some of those things.
Oh
It
yeah.
might actually be a tart, uh, you know,
Ooh, that's a
tartlet
good
has lost
answer.
all meanings to me.
Yeah.
And of course, you kind of look at the overall consistency of it. What kind of cheesecake are we talking? Is it this some no bake thing that's kind
Oh
of
no, no,
faux,
no,
or
no.
is it
Good stuff.
actually like
The good stuff.
is it probably it could be argued it's a custard. So
Mm.
I will say my wife makes a wonderful New York style cheesecake. It is deadly. I'm a fan of cheesecake. I'm okay with fruit or chocolate in it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I go to the Cheesecake Factory, I will be happy to share a slice when we are back allowed to be in places. And sharing food, like I mean,
That.
in 2021, it's one of those
Mm.
things that you're like, oh my God, we used to do that all the time. I'd go out with friends and share nachos, and
Right.
I
Yeah.
can't eat a dessert by myself. So the answer is cheesecake is delicious. Call it whatever you want.
There you go. I think that's perfect, especially for the topic that we're talking about today. So your
Oh my God, are
background.
you saying it's a hybrid dessert, Chris?
It is a
Is that what
hybrid
you're saying?
dessert, indeed. Yes. Because I like to think of it as a cake, but I actually looked it up, and it is officially a pie. Um, but I'm sure you could find contradicting articles to that. So yeah, so you're these two Miniman, most widely known for not being at Red Hat, surprisingly. You have a history on the Cube, and I'm curious, the Cube star joins Red Hat. What are you up to these days?
Yeah, so right. I joined Red Hat a little over 6 months ago after 10 years being with the Cube. So, in case
Mm-hmm.
any of the audience doesn't know, the Cube is known as the ESPN of tech. Started back in 2010. It was how do we take kind of a live mobile video to events, and we've done hundreds of shows. The Cube is still going. The Cube
Yeah.
was supporting KubeCon Europe this week. It was at Red Hat Summit with us last week, and I was one of the hosts. So it was a crazy, wild ride. It's one of those things, I'm an engineer by training. I'm a technologist at heart. How I ended up in front of a camera talking about those kind of things, it must have been the hair, I think. But no,
Definitely
it's
there. Yeah.
Chris. I don't know about you, but I never thought in my career that like talking on video and doing this kind of thing is something that I would be doing. I loved pulling in guests. I actually helped recruit hosts and guest hosts, and loved doing it. Had a great time. John, Dave, the whole team there had a ton of fun. And yeah, just in 2020, like so many other people,
Mm.
a lot of things changed. I reevaluated some things, and just was time for me to make a move. So that's what brought me over to Red Hat.
Well, it's a good place to be. And I don't say that just because I work here. I say that because I believe it. And that's why I work here. So thank you for joining us. Your expertise is very much welcome. So what is your job title? I mean, you're not like Stu Miniman, TV host or star
Yeah,
or
no,
whatever.
you're right, and it's interesting because have I done some videos since I've been over? Yeah, hopefully
Mm-hmm.
some of the audience caught Red Hat Summit. I moderated a couple of panels with a bunch of the general managers. I've done some other videos internally and some externally. My title is I'm the director of market insights, and what does that mean? It's a product marketing manager role where I meet with customers, I talk to press and analysts, and I also internally I do still wear some of that kind of analyst hat. So
Okay.
what was nice is joining any new company, it's like, okay, how can I contribute immediately?
Mm-hmm.
And everybody was like, hey, this paper, this presentation, this thing, can you tear it apart? What do customers really think, what's actually happening out in the world,
Right.
how do we make sure that we're not in our own little echo chamber? So I've done a lot of that. And living in the community, how do we make sure that we're participating, moving things forward, and doing what's right out there for everyone?
That brings us right into the next question, right? Like that community, that market landscape for Kubernetes especially is an ever evolving picture these days. How do you even go about assessing like OpenShift against these like hundreds of other potential like container orchestrators, right? Like there's so many now.
Yeah, you're right. It is a vast landscape. It has become beyond a meme. You look at the CNCF landscape and you say, hundreds of projects, there's no way I can figure it out. It is more complicated than, going to the grocery store and trying to figure out what pasta sauce you want.
Oh yeah.
And, here's what I'd say. I watched this space. I'd been, been in the open source community for a long time. I did the OpenStack shows for years. I did KubeCon for a bunch of years. And there's I even said a few years ago, this Kubernetes thing, it's just going to kind of get baked in there, and will it matter so much? I
Mm-hmm.
listened to Clayton gave in his keynote at KubeCon. He said, we've been talking for a couple of years. Kubernetes hopefully is getting boring,
Yeah.
and that's good. But boring does not mean that it's completely undifferentiated. So what I saw out there is, yes, there's Kubernetes everywhere. Every cloud, every platform, every vendor in the environment, supports or integrates in Kubernetes.
Mm-hmm.
But that's often where they stop.
Right.
One of the sins back in the OpenStack world was, things like, okay, every storage vendor supports it, but they supported a little bit and they didn't really do that much. How do we actually go cloud native? How do we take advantage of these opportunities? What does that even mean?
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's not just about, okay, hey, containers are really cool, and of course Linux has a very strong play when it comes to containers,
Mm-hmm.
but how am I really architecting environments to do what? To build applications. This is really where my applications not only live, but I build new ones. I modernize what I'm doing on top of it. And what I had seen from the outside is Red Hat was really in a class of its own. It was very difficult actually to compare what Red Hat was doing with OpenShift and everyone else, because everyone else you had to say, oh, well, I take a bunch of these pieces and they're working on it, and let me build services around it, but they didn't have the focus and the practice that Red Hat had built. And it was really, one of the things that brought me over is I had the opportunity to talk to a lot of customers
Right.
that are in this space, and so many technologies can even get a customer to talk to you, and Red Hat can bury you with all of the customer references. And not only will you get them from Red Hat, but you go to the conferences or you read blog sites and you go on social, they're all talking about what they're doing and talking about how Red Hat pieces, especially like OpenShift, fits into their environments. I mean, I saw it on the outside, and even I love on the inside. It was like, oh hey, there's a CIO in India talking about, hey, I'm doing this wonderful stuff with Amazon and VMware Cloud, and what do I do for my application? I run OpenShift on top of it. And our team was like, oh cool, we've got a public reference that wasn't our reference team putting it in.
Right,
It's
right.
talking publicly about, like, I'm super excited in doing it. And that's the kind of thing that excited me and brought me over to be like, how can I work with those customers, how can I help the community along those journeys.
So speaking of those journeys, right? Like, what are some of the challenges that you see folks having adopting these cloud native environments or building their cloud native environments out to, full production grade?
Oh boy. Chris, how many?
Sorry, I
let
didn't
me
mean
see.
to. I mean, you got as long as you want on the show.
Yeah, you have entire regular running series on your program to talk about this. So, look, I guess one of the things I wanted to share with the audience here, we're doing the soft launch of an ebook that I've been working on for a number of months with the team, and it's about hybrid cloud and Kubernetes and the architectural decisions you need to make. Fundamentally, we talk about three pillars. And got those. Joe Fernandez, who I report to, has been talking about this for a while. First of all, it's about your applications.
Yeah.
Line I've used for years, Chris, is I'm an infrastructure guy by background. My background, networking, virtualization. The only reason we have these technologies is to support your applications.
Right.
You go talk to the C-suite. I don't care about software-defined networking. I don't care about how many cores and how many things you got on and everything. What do I care? I care about my business. My business runs on application. My data is super important, and my people. So, but the applications are so what's important. So that's where it starts. And so one of the big changes, what are the challenges here? Chris, the average enterprise, it has hundreds, if not thousands of applications.
Yeah.
And the average application, it's too old and it probably sucks. So, if you talk to people that use applications, here's an example I use. My mother retired relatively recently. She worked in hospice care, and she would talk to me about the application that she had to use for her, the people that she was giving service. And she's like, I have to manually enter the same thing 3 times. Whoa. And even, it wasn't the laptop or anything like that. It was just the architecture of what she's doing was very manual. It wasn't built to help you get your job done. It was help to, you need to fill out all this paperwork and follow all of this compliance. And when I talk to analysts that work on applications, it's just like, well, we squeeze more life out of our applications than we can. I think the greatest thing about virtualization was I could shove an application in a VM and never touch it again. But that's also the greatest sin problem. Of virtualization is, when I started working with virtualization, over 15 years ago, it was my operating system's going into life, the server's going into support. Hey, should we update that, horrible application? And somebody was like, well, hey, no, we can stick it in a VM and leave it there for another 5 years. IT's real happy, but the users of the application are miserable. Right. So we know that in today's world, not only am I building new applications, but we're constantly, we're changing, we're adjusting, we're tweaking, we're making it more modular. So that journey of applications is a huge challenge. The infrastructure is the second pillar, and the third one is the people, the processes, and the tooling. Chris, unfortunately, all of those are super challenging. So,
especially that culture piece, right? Like,
right. I mean, it goes without saying that often the technology part is the easy one, and it's the culture one that's tough. But I tell you, the applications could give it a run for its money. Because if I look at my application portfolio and say, okay, modernize all of that. There are some out there that would like, hey, give us a week or two and we will just make that happen. And when I hear those stories, it's like, the narrator comes on and says, unfortunately, we know how this story is going to end. It's like, it is not going to go
Takes them a
easy.
couple weeks to even scope it, right?
Yeah,
Like, yeah,
and yes, there are certain things that we can move, there are certain things we can modernize, but there's often times where it's like, oh yeah, database migration, modernization, those kind of things.
yeah,
It's one of those things, it gets to the 80% complete, and then it stops, and it will take you the next 6 months to figure out how to get that last 20%. So
yeah.
it is, yes, culture, but oh my gosh, applications, understanding, what do you build new, what do you sassify, what do you modernize, what do you lift and shift, and which things are you just like, hey, we're just going to run this thing into the ground until
Mhm.
we absolutely don't need it and replace it and things like
Corn it
that,
off as
because
best as you can and
otherwise
just let it go. Yeah.
it's there. There's certain things that it's like, the finance department says leave that in the dark corner, that there's a spider guarding it and you don't want to mess with it, so
You open the door, a giant tarantula falls down. Are you sure you want to be here right now?
exactly.
So, I mean, I know from my experience, in ops, in DevOps, in just as a consumer, right? Like, I can tell if I go to your website and I'm buying something, what's on your back end. Like, I can tell that nowadays. I can tell if you've adopted an agile process or DevOps or anything like that. I can do that just by going to your website nowadays. And I know I'm not the only one that can do that. So when we're talking about transformation of applications, transformation of infrastructure, and then that last piece, people, process, and culture, where do you start, right? Like, this paper that we're putting out, openshift.com/hybrid, does that help there? I mean, does that give people a good place to say, okay, if I start here, I'm going to have a better outcome than if I started here?
So it's a beginning of what are some of those architectural and organizational things that I need to consider.
Mhm.
It's only about 25 pages, so
Right.
obviously it's not
It's
a
not.
blueprint
It's not a
to do
business guide.
everything. But here's I guess the starting point of it. Often when we think of something, we think of when we first heard of it, and it is very difficult to change our mind on it. So the first thing of the paper is starting with, let's start with hybrid cloud. I go back to we talked about the great cloud wars and things like that, and it
Right.
was public cloud will rule everything, private cloud is garbage and it doesn't do anything. Hybrid cloud was kind of this, you know, halfway house of what the heck is it? It's the mix of the crap you had and the things you hope you do. And if that is your mindset of hybrid, and oh, what was the NIST use case? Oh, well,
Right.
let's follow the sun and burst and do all these, wacky things that you look at and you say,
Data
like,
gravity prevents that from
yeah,
happening
wait,
right out of the door.
I mean, Chris, if anyone is going to change the laws of physics, I expected our friends over in IBM Research that are working on quantum computing and
Mhm.
all that stuff to find some way to bend, those rules or anything. But
Yeah.
for us mere mortals, yeah, there's certain, data gravity you talked about, locality.
Yeah.
There's certain, fundamental laws that we need to follow. So what we wanted to do is, first of all, let's all agree what hybrid is, because
Right.
hybrid is, you've got your data center, you've got your hosted environment, you've got public cloud, and oh, by the way, in every survey you see is, do you have a cloud? Even when they say yes, I have a cloud, well, I forgot about the one group over doing there, and the new cloud
Mhm.
comes up with something
Mhm.
else.
That
So
company we acquired over here that's using
well,
DigitalOcean,
you're
it's
right.
everywhere,
It
right?
is, it
Yeah.
is there, and oh, let's throw the curveball into the whole mix. That everybody's talking about. Hey, edge computing. Are you doing that? Are you moving that and doing anything? So
Mhm.
the first piece of the paper is really hybrid. Is you're going to have lots of pieces, and that's only going to continue. That's for
Right.
you're at hybrid today. You will be at hybrid tomorrow, and our hybrid definition will be more of an umbrella that will embrace more of what's happening in that world, not a delineation of this is what I do and what I don't do. Because when the next new thing comes out, hybrid needs to be able to do it. And that's
Right.
what, KubeCon week, you talk about, like, oh my gosh, the explosion of the number of new projects, the new innovation coming from lots of end users and
Mhm.
vendors in the space. Um, what I don't want to do is adopt an architecture that when, hey, something comes out and you're like, hey, that'll actually help me move faster, answer the business questions I have. You don't want to say, oh, well, I can't do that.
Right.
So it's not easy to do. But that's one of the things that really excited me too about what we do with OpenShift, how we work with the ecosystem, with the hyperscalers, the other clouds,
Mm-hmm.
lots of environments, edge, and all those things. Is it takes a lot of work and there's a lot of nuance in. I don't just work with it a little, but I actually like integrate with it deeply, and I can take advantage of those kind of technologies, and that's what hybrid done right means.
Right.
And right, if you talk to lots of companies out there, most companies today, if you ask them their cloud strategy, they're not going to say yes, I choose hybrid, but when you look at what they have, yes, they're doing hybrid. So that's a big piece of the paper. Is okay, step one is understand what you've got, and number
Right.
two is what do you have to do a little bit different. As
Mm-hmm.
an analyst for years, I've been saying to do hybrid or multi-cloud right, it would be really nice if it wasn't just a collection of pieces, but how do I get my arms around it? How do I coordinate across it? That
Right.
consistency, which is what OpenShift has really focused on. And heck, before that, RHEL has had decades of deeply working in all of those environments. That's what got me excited to work in this space. And this paper specifically, builds on that history and experience that we've had.
And having read a draft of the paper early on, there's one line in it that I think, or one topic, all right, talking about transforming infrastructure, pulling apart the app and the infrastructure pieces and making those separate, immutable or consumable units of tooling essentially to put together in kind of a DevOps, GitOps kind of way, right?
Yeah.
Like it leads you into these methodologies of the future without actually saying like embrace more agile kind of flows and DevOps and GitOps, right? Like, but it's definitely pointing at certain things and saying like you definitely have to like your OS and your app can't be dependent upon each other, right? Like that Java app running in RHEL 4 can't rely on those packages anymore, right? Like you've got to have modern OSs, modern containers, essentially, or equivalents of those things living inside this new hybrid environment that you're working in.
Yeah, so we talked earlier how like on premise makes me shake my head and think
Yeah.
less of whoever said it. The other one that just gets thrown around a lot that sends chills through me is just lift and shift, and it's like
God, it's
right.
the most money burning operation ever.
Right. It was like, right. What there's that, is it from SpongeBob or something? It's the people like just shoveling money into
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah,
fire, and things like that. Because look, are there times where, lifting and moving it into a new environment is something you need to do? Sure. There must be some
contracts ending,
modernization,
something. Yeah.
take advantage of that, because the challenge we all have is if you do a new thing the old way,
Oh, ooh,
that's not good.
yeah. No.
What's the biggest challenge? I tell you, Chris, we all have certain things. Well, there's certain tools, there's the certain processes in the way that I do things. It's like it's why I love talking to when we have interns in, and I
Mhm.
love it. The Red Hat culture is you are not doing your job if you don't speak up and say, hey, have we considered this, or have you looked at this, have you done this? Because what I love is when somebody says, oh, hey, here's this new way of doing things, and I'll look at be like, you just saved me 20 minutes a day or a
Right.
couple hours a week. Oh my god, I can't believe I didn't know about. When did that come out? And they're like, oh, I've been using that for the last 18 months. I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I'd known. Well,
Mm-hmm.
there's things that we've been doing for 5 or 10 more years that you're like, why are we doing this? It's like my last job, we had a line that we used. It was, friends don't let friends build data centers. And it's
Right.
like, because you as an enterprise, you suck at pouring concrete, doing power and cooling. There's
Yeah.
very few companies in the world that are good on that. If you suck at it, you should move away. Well,
Mm.
unfortunately, if you built a data center, you're often in that for 25 to 35 years, if not more. We
Mm.
talked about how long people, keep things running.
Yeah.
So it is, how do I make sure that I'm thinking of new things without having to also constantly course correct and change what's going on. So, there's that balance. There's a line I've used a bunch of times, which said, Chris, do you know the best time to do something?
It's like growing a tree, right? You should have done
Yeah.
it yesterday.
Well, so right. So the problem we have is with the pace of change, it used to be the best time to do something was a year ago
Mm.
because now you'd have a year of experience. Today, if I could wait another 6 to 12 months, will there be something better, cheaper, faster, more wonderful? Possibly. So it'd be
Sure.
awesome if I could wait another year. But reality is, if you don't start now, you're never going to get there and you can't constantly push off the future. So
Right.
the answer is you go to battle with the technology and the tools that you have today, but make sure that you're being educated and understanding because the challenge we have, I talked about there's this gap for most people. The
Right.
technologies that I understand and I'm comfortable with, you're usually not on today's technology. As a matter of fact, we know, talk to the typical enterprise and you say, okay, product gets announced today.
Mm.
Am I ready for that today? No, I'm running the thing N-2.
Right.
So that's where my point of view is. And if I look at the roadmap, I look at these things and you're like, the roadmap looks like some kind of alien magic that I don't understand because I'm at something, you're showing me something a year or so out, and I'm running something a couple of years behind. Think about how much technology has changed in the last 3 years.
Oh,
Look at Kubernetes.
right.
If you would have asked me about Kubernetes 3 years ago, we were having a very different conversation.
Very different conversation. Yeah.
So that is, we change, things change so fast that we do need to update and things. At least, hey, Kubernetes, we're only going to have 3 updates a year, which
And that is just for like the people, right? Like we realized in the community, I'm a CNCF ambassador. I can talk to this. We realized in the community that doing 4 releases a year under the conditions of COVID was actually detrimental to our community. So pushing it back to 3 a year, I think, is just a brilliant idea. But not only that, it allows everybody else to kind of consume the latest thing a little bit better, right? Like your immediate update to the next Kubernetes version will take a little bit longer, and it does give you a little bit more time. But how many people are actually running Cube 121 right now? It's very few, which is scary because the best security advice for Kubernetes is run the latest version, right? So,
yep. I tell you, that was, CoreOS, of course, was acquired by Red Hat a couple of years ago. That was one of the promises, that one of the things exciting when they first came out is we should treat our OS the way that you think about Chrome. Right. It should be updated, right? All my friends in the security world that's the biggest problem is that you're not on the latest. You need to be on the latest. You need to get that fix. Whether that's on your mobile phone or
whatever it is,
data center. And the promise of cloud was, it's funny. I used to say, you don't ask what version of Azure or AWS you're running on. You're running on the latest version. The funny thing is, if you look at the Kubernetes offering that they have, they've got a few different versions. So, I go in, I actually went into Azure yesterday and was like, oh, hey, I want to choose, I can choose the, of course, Azure Red Hat OpenShift, or I can choose AKS from Azure. And it's like, hey, in what version of Kubernetes do you want to choose? And it's like, oh, great. So now the cloud isn't by default up on the latest because, as we said before, enterprises, we need to have our upgrade cycles and testing and manage all that. But it is, unfortunately, Chris, wasn't cloud supposed to be just cheap, easy, and fix all these problems?
Right. Like cloud was supposed to be the industry, like consumerization, as I'm holding my iPhone. Cloud was supposed to be the iPhone of tech, and it didn't work out that way. Yeah, right.
It's almost like there's still computers underneath it and stuff.
It's crazy. Like there's still silicon there. It's amazing.
software is eating the world, but it still needs to chew and swallow, I guess. So
Right, exactly. It's yeah, it can't eat the world in one bite. So let's dive into the third part of this paper a little bit. Talking about transforming people, process, and culture. Right, like culture is the hardest part. Let's just set that up right there. Right, like I've been in organizations where the entire IT department has got up and walked out before, and I'm the guy that comes in and has to try and clean it up. Not a good place to be in your career. Just let me tell you that right up front. Uh, but that culture change, as hard as it is necessary, right? Like you have to start thinking about your applications and your infrastructure in different ways as
yeah,
advantages that you can create for yourself, not as burdens that you're saddled with.
yeah. I look at the last 20 years of my career. We've talked about like silos.
Yeah.
And 20 years ago, my networking background, I worked at a large storage company for a bunch of years, and
Mm-hmm.
the storage team and the network team, it was one of those, hey, at the company picnic, you better separate these two, and definitely don't have them, playing flag football because it might get dirty. So
Wow.
and part of it was, do you have a general understanding and can you build empathy between the teams?
Right.
What is DevOps? A lot of what DevOps isn't a tool set. It is
Mm-hmm.
a cultural mindset. And you add DevSecOps into it. Hey, how do we get security into the entire discussion, have everyone thinking about it overall, not something that is bolted on at the end or thrown over the wall
Mm-hmm.
to the security team to handle. So
Right.
the more we can have an understanding between our groups, the better things can be. I'll tell you, one of the ones I loved 2 years ago, I think it was, I went to Ansible Fest.
Mm-hmm.
Back when we had it in person,
Right.
and
What was it, Atlanta?
one of the kind of light bulbs that went off for me is who uses Ansible. And it wasn't one group, it was the product owner, the developer, and
Mm-hmm.
and the executive
Network engineer,
all
the nine
had their
yards.
way to
Yeah.
look into the tooling. And while they all spoke their own language, if I had a common tool that I can see what I need and there's communication between, Slack isn't going to get everybody working together.
No.
GitHub does get people working together a lot more.
Right.
So it's, nothing wrong with Slack, and it's useful and everything like that. But when we think about collaboration, we need to think of it as to the right, how do I do my job? What are the things I need? And, software can actually be a unifying factor between those environments. And there's lots of examples we've seen. I've seen lots of companies, when they're building more software, it pulls their teams together because they have to have common APIs, they have to have common user interfaces, common experiences. We see that when we make acquisitions as to how do you pull that software in is
Mm-hmm.
part of the same thing you're doing when you go through the cultural onboarding of all the people involved.
Right. And we here at Red Hat, we've had two interesting, add-ons, acquisitions, whatever you want to call them, right? Like we just acquired StackRox.
Yep.
We brought over the ACM team
Yeah,
from
yeah.
IBM, and we've integrated both of those things into OpenShift now, and there's a bright future in both of those. But we've also open sourced them, and we've gotten better at open sourcing things. We being Red Hat, because I remember when the Ansible acquisition happened, it took a year and a half, almost 2 years to get Ansible Tower open sourced, and now it's just like we can do it so quickly because we're so used to doing it, right? Like it's this too can happen for your organization when it comes to your infrastructure and your challenges. You just got to let everybody have a seat at the table, right? Like not exclude anyone, be more inclusive. That's and it's funny, someone mentioned Emily Freeman's DevOps for Dummies book was more about getting people talking to each other and working with each other than it was about technology. And
Yep.
that's true, right? Like the idea of, me throwing something over the wall to the security team and they're going to pull out their checklists and make sure, oh, OS top 10 is checked, and oh, the NIST standards checked, and oh, this is checked. That doesn't actually make this application more secure. It's just compliant, right? So you want to make sure that those people have spots in the pipeline, but also spots at the table to discuss.
Yeah.
Not only at the end where everybody gets together and does things. which then inevitably ends to a weekend release taking the whole weekend. Um, you don't really want that. So how do you take that pillar of automation that Red Hat is kind of uniquely situated to give you and make hybrid cloud or making hybrid in general an advantage for you, right? Like,
Yeah.
is there a silver bullet to this? No, but there are
No.
some different ways to do it.
Well, and it's funny because we talked about like the CNCF landscape, and
Yeah.
it's a mess. And share with our audience a little bit. It makes me smile a little bit because when I'm in some of these meetings with some of the PMs and hearing some of the engineerings, and they're like, this doesn't work the way I want, and there's all these challenges and things like that. It's like, take a deep breath, look at how far we've come. Yes, there are challenges that we need to
Mm-hmm.
have, but we've got the best solution in the marketplace. We get great feedback. We have lots of our customers working with us, and
Lots of our
yes,
partners working with us.
here's the
Yeah.
good news: is we've got lots of work to do for many years. There's no shortage of things to do. It's a shame there's certain technologies that you're like, okay, I reach a certain point, let's put it into steady state and let's move on to the next cool thing.
Right.
We've got work for years
Yeah. I mean,
to do. So it is. It's good to know, what a strong focus there is by the whole team, and it's been, I've loved the comment I've made in 6 months is, have there been any surprises at Red Hat? I said, not really. Really, Red Hat is more Red Hat on the inside than it was on the outside. When you
mhm.
see some of the, you know, robust discussions and conversations and things going on inside, you're like, wow, that is it's amazing.
Mhm.
Sometimes a little scary, but usually good in a good way. And it's been so nice. Like this paper, it's got my signature and my name on the inside, but so many people that helped work on it. Obviously, when it got to some of the product pieces there, but really value all the feedback. Not to mention, actual editors, that can help and make things, even better, and designers that can make it look pretty, and the customer references that can make the quotes, and the analysts. There's so many pieces that are involved that it was like, hey, it's so nice to, have those resources and work on those things, and everything, very, very collaborative in nature, obviously, at Red Hat.
Yeah, the amount of collaboration, right? Not just even within like my own team, but like people, I'm in this unique position where I'm running this channel and everything else. So I have to reach out across different lines, right? Across different business units and everything. And everyone is so collaborative. It is really refreshing, right? Like this is the environment I've wanted to be in for years, and now I'm finally here kind of
Well,
deal.
Chris, you bring a point. So it's funny, you know, I first worked with Red Hat. It's scary for me to say. It was 21 years ago, I think, the first time I started working with Red Hat. And over my career, I've worked with so many companies. And you have good interactions, you have bad interactions, you have things in between. But, the culture of Red Hat does come through. It is, as we said, I think a differentiator of the company. And it is one of the top things that brought me here. Because that first interaction back in the, oh my God, wild, wild west of Linux. I mean, you remember
Yeah.
VA and Turbo, and
Oh
before
yeah.
like SUSE or any of those came out,
Hmm.
it was, I was working at EMC, and as like the young product manager, they're like, well, we've got all these Unix stuff, and we've got the Microsoft relationship, and Oracle, and Cisco, and Intel, and all these things. There's this mess of stuff in Linux. You've probably got a few spare cycles. Why don't you figure that out and figure out how we should do it? And boy, the day that Red Hat called us up and said, hey, so we think we're going to put out this thing called Red Hat Advanced Server,
Hmm.
and we're going to target it towards being a package that has all the patches and all the things we need. And we just gone from the 2.4 to the 2.6 kernel and all this stuff. It was like, wait, wait, wait. So I can tell companies, you use this one and it's going to work. And we tested it and it did. And like literally we had like, this multi-page document as to all the way to make Linux work and
Right.
all the vendors we might work to it was like, yeah, so you're going to use Red Hat and that's going to
Yeah.
be the default. And if you really need something else, you need better have a good reason, because we just didn't have enough resources.
Right.
At EMC, public company,
Yeah.
doing a lot in that things. And that led me through a certain environment. And then when I was doing the cube, I interacted a lot with what was going on in the cloud space specifically.
Mhm.
Interviewed Ashesh like God 7-8 years ago the first
Right.
time,
Yeah.
back before Kubernetes and that environment. But watched the growth of the cloud piece, and that's what excited me too.
Yeah, the the growth of cloud, I think, is it's an order of magnitude every year, right? Like looking at, earnings reports and such. But the amount that you can cover your cloud in Red Hat is almost equal, which is great, I feel like, right? Like you can manage your cloud with Red Hat, you can put your applications on systems that are, designed to work across all clouds because they are running the same software underneath the hood kind of deal. And you don't have to worry about, oh, over here we're version 1 point something and over here we're version 1 point not something, and you know this one feature we can't put in this cluster but we can put in that cluster, and you don't have to worry about that. It's a consistent operating environment. And because of operators themselves, it becomes a more manageable situation, and you're kind of treating your applications, or not your applications, but your infrastructure and your tooling as a real advantage as opposed to something that's holding you back.
Yeah, well, that was one of the lines. The question is, is hybrid a whole bunch of pieces that becomes a boat anchor,
Mm,
it slows you down. We all know, you talked about, Chris, how you can look at somebody's website and realize that they're not, moving fast. If you read the big DevOps survey that happens every year,
mhm.
there are certain companies that are like, well, we're going to take our 12 to 18 month release cycle and we're just going to go faster. And, we're not going to really change, but yeah, we're not going to get it on a 9-month cadence. And it's the train's going off the tracks. It's not, happening fast, versus the ones that are like, yeah, we push code, whenever we want and push
Right.
multiple times a day,
Yeah.
and can do all of these things. It's, looking at what differentiates, the leaders is, it was completely re-architected. We try to take away some of those dependencies so that I can make changes.
Right.
It's loosely coupled. You know, two pizza teams, which I still struggle with, but maybe it's just because I have, a teenage boy in the household, and given it, he can
Yeah.
eat, most
Yeah.
of two pizzas
No,
himself.
I mean, I
Uh,
remember when I was 18, I could put some pizza away. Yeah.
I unfortunately will still eat too much pizza given the chance, but it's right, the way that you do things and move forward. So right, can hybrid architected right from your apps, your infrastructure, and your people, really can be a booster rocket. It can help. I
Absolutely.
loved. I was listening in Red Hat Summit. The speaker we had on from FEMA, and he talked about immutable architectures, and I build something. It's the right once, do it anywhere. And right, it's not like he's moving things everywhere, but it's if we make a decision, where does an application live? I can figure that out later because I can
Right.
build it wherever I need. I can use the CRCs and have this environment where I build it, and then deployment is something that's separate, and I can take care of that. And if
Right.
things change in the future, no problem. And there's some cool new thing that I want to take advantage of. Often I can get my environment there much faster. We want to lower those barriers to entry. Frictionless is
Right.
something that we were talking about for years in cloud, and I don't hear it as much anymore because we've reached a certain point where we've done the low hanging fruit, and
Mm.
some of it is a little bit harder.
Yeah.
And we're still, it's crazy to me how early we are still in cloud, because most of us, we've been in it and talking about it for more than a decade. But when you
Hmm.
look at, you know, the over $1 trillion of the market, and where, I mean, Amazon and Microsoft and Google and Alibaba and everything are growing gangbusters, but
Right.
we're still a small slice of the overall picture there. So yeah, exciting time, lots of opportunities there. And you know working with those customers, because a thing we've said often is strategy isn't something that you make a 3 to 5 year strategy. It is something that you set a direction and you need to revisit often, because a quarter from now, things might be a little different. I think
Yeah.
2020 put that in sharp focus for all of us. I think when
Right.
we all went into 2020, we had slightly different plans than by the time, we hit the spring.
That is definitely for sure. Yes, I remember my last trip. It was actually to Las Vegas of all places.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You know,
So, Chris, were you going to be in Amsterdam?
I was planning on going. I think I even
I
had.
had the most wonderful trip to. I had a conference in Dublin, the conference in Amsterdam, and in between was going to go see a buddy in Prague, which I've never been to. And it was like, 2 weeks of like seeing some lovely sights in Europe and really enjoying some flavors and everything. And since then, I've only had takeout from places within a 15-mile radius of my house. So,
I don't even think I've gotten that far out yet, to be honest with you. Maybe 8, 9 miles, maybe.
yeah.
But yeah, it's the world has changed, right? For better or worse, the world has changed, and we're now realizing that your technology can actually hold you up, right? Like having everybody VPN to one thing, that is a single point of failure, right? Like you need to spread everything kind of consistently distributed across multiple environments. Why? Because, well, guess what? Things break. And when they break, you don't want them to take down your whole company. You want the mean time to recovery to be minimal. And the best way to do that is to often have multiple pods running in a Kubernetes cluster, right? In a single deployment. So the leaps and bounds you can make in a hybrid environment where you're taking advantage of not only Kubernetes or OpenShift or Ansible, but you're taking advantage of cloud services where you consider yourselves to be weaker in, right? Like me, for example, like I would take storage from someplace else all day long because I'm not a storage person. But when it comes to compute, I'm a little picky. I like certain things. Um, so the whole transformation in just the past year has been amazing to watch. But what do you think is like coming up on the horizon that's like just over the edge that's going to change things? Anything in particular, or is it just this reckoning of we're in this world now and we've got to adjust?
Um, yeah. So we know the only constant in our industry
It's
is
changing.
change.
Yeah.
So how do we make that easier?
Right.
So we touched on it briefly in the paper, and it was one of the topics for KubeCon this week. Something like GitOps.
Mm-hmm.
So we are early. Let us see. The promise of that immutability. You want to make any changes, it has to go through Git.
Mm-hmm.
There are things about that are super attractive, but is it too regimented for most customers? I can imagine certain government agencies that are like, this is perfect.
Right.
But the average company, the problem we have is, we're used to, well, I want to be able to adjust things ourselves. The thing that, the funny thing is I said the misconception of cloud for the longest time was, uh, building, your stack in your data center. You had all these knobs and things that you did and everything. Cloud is much simpler. You
Mm-hmm.
talked about compute. Hey, Chris, if I went to favorite vendor in the data center for a server versus Amazon or Azure,
Mm-hmm.
I think Amazon and Azure actually have more different choices and decisions you have to make
Oh
to
yeah.
be able to roll out a compute node. So
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those. I'm like, oh my god, yeah. I wrote an article years ago when we first dug into Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
and wish I could go see a data center, but got to listen like James Hamilton speak and got to interview him and totally geeked out on it. And it was Amazon is not off the shelf,
Oh
generic white box stuff.
no.
They're what I called hyper optimized. It's like
Mm-hmm.
when he's like, oh yeah, we have two PhDs working on the power supplies on these
Mm-hmm.
machines. Because if I can crank out 1% of cost or save 1% of energy,
Yeah.
those two people paid for their own salaries by an order of magnitude.
Mm-hmm.
So it is crazy to think about, that just not my handful of servers or hundreds of servers, but the tens of thousands of servers for each environment that
Right.
they have. So that's very different. So the problem, right? Corey Quinn's written some great things. Is
Mm.
Amazon, you got too many features. Nobody needs all of it. Nobody other than Werner and Andy Jassy have any clue how all of this stuff all works. And so it's always we need to have ways to simplify things and make things easier. So
Well, all right. We're coming up on the end of our time here, I believe. So I'm going to ask you this last question. And it's a good one for you, especially. What gets you up in the morning?
yeah.
I mean, what really motivates you to get out of bed and be like, I'm doing this today?
Yeah, so it might sound a little bit corny, but part of it's the mission. When I look at what brought me to Red Hat, I felt like I could help make an impact here, but the community activity and the good that the technology that we do helps the world.
Right.
So I don't say that lightly. When I talk to certain companies and I know our teams are all super proud when they're just like, how much is helping health organizations to
Yes.
track and fight COVID right now.
Yeah.
The work that goes into sustainability, the things that have been done. Not only at Red Hat, but hey, that even that parent company, IBM, who helps for things. I watched Jim Whitehurst talking
Hmm.
about sustainability initiatives. Being part of that overall mission and getting to work with customers, help work through their challenges, and hopefully make the world a better place. That's one of the things that brought me over and has been super exciting to dig into. And I can't wait until it won't just be Teams, Zoom, WebEx, and things there, but actually get to talk in person to more of these people.
Yeah. No, I can't wait for those days either, to be honest with you, because talking to people through here is one thing, but it's vastly different when you can like sit down, have a meal with somebody, just talk and
Yeah.
just be like, where are your real challenges? And 9 times out of 10, it's like, well, I've got this one thing that's really bugging me. And that's when you get into the meat of the discussion, is actually after the meeting. Uh,
Yeah,
so
because
yeah.
it is those interesting collisions or side comments or
Hmm.
right over a meal or out in the hallway after, where sometimes some of the most meaningful conversations can happen. That's why yeah, I mean we're all trying to reproduce the hallway tracks at the virtual events and finding ways to have meaningful connections with people. I still love people that reach out and we have let's still grab time to have a conversation sometimes, whether it's about work, careers, or just to catch up. Because yeah, I miss people. Not
Yeah, I
all of
mean,
them, but
pe-
I do miss people.
people are a huge part of technology nowadays, right? Like you can't deny that anymore. So yeah, being a people person is vastly important in nowadays, because you have to show some folks value, right? Like, what are you doing to improve things and making things more sustainable, more flexible? Someone just commented, I hope Summit will be in person again next year, as
Yeah,
do I.
yeah. So
But
hopefully
we've got a lot of work to do
yeah,
before we
and
can get there.
we all know there'll be some hybrid involved. So
Right.
Chris, this is also it was Star Wars week this week. So
Hmm.
did you get to do any special shows, or do you have any favorite Star Wars movies or shows that you know
Oh.
I get to ask you a question before we wrap?
I mean, Star Wars is a huge multiverse, right? And then you throw in the addition of Disney Plus with the Mandalorian and everything. Like it's really getting hard to be like, no, I like the prequels or the sequels or the main trilogy or the TV stuff. It's like there's so much of it now. But to be honest with you, I still think some of those, Obi-Wan Kenobi references are still valid today, right? Like, you know, trust and patience and those kinds of things still apply, right? Like if you don't give yourself enough leeway to learn, you're never going to get ahead. You're going to constantly be behind. So you have to give your teams, your people, the patience that is needed to get them to where they need to be. So that's kind of the mantra that I've taken away from the Star Wars universe lately, is that Jedi kind of focus of patience and
Well,
diligence.
you must be like me, super excited for the Obi-Wan Kenobi series that's coming.
Yeah, like
So yeah.
let's get this thing on the road. All right.
Yeah, I have to say, huge Ewan McGregor fanboy. So
Oh wow. Okay.
definitely excited to see him. They had Kamal Nanjiani
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
during Red Hat Summit, and he talked about being part of that. So yeah, I do love that. Right, that there's new things happening. What I've loved recently in Star Wars is them going beyond the main pieces.
Mhm.
I'm a huge fan of the original series.
Yeah. Likewise.
And if you ask me my favorite movie, it's probably Empire.
Hmm.
So there's some fun stuff from the prequels. Love the memes, especially talking with my teens. There's
Yeah.
lots of memes from that. The
Mhm.
sequels, there were parts of them I liked, but I
There's a
would be
repeat,
like,
right? Like, yeah.
thank God for like Mandalorian, because
Mhm.
that brought everything around. So
Yeah.
I was
Mandalorian was surprisingly good,
yeah.
and um, the kind of throwing out of the old multiverse and saying we're going to kind of go our own way with the Disney acquisition of Star Wars, I think, while it might have ticked off a lot of people, was probably the smartest thing they ever did.
Well, they're just annoyed because Kylo said it first. It's like you must kill all the old and everything like that. But yeah, it's look, even the bad Star Wars I'll take, and because
Exactly.
love to debate it and have fun with it. And yeah, you saw during Commons I had fun with it. I mean,
Hmm.
I knew it was kind of fate eventually that I'd end up at Red Hat, since they had. It was Red Hat Summit 2017 in Boston. They gave out May the 4th shirts, and they had a
Nice.
Jedi fight on stage. And
There
I
you
was
go.
just like, that's the type of company I want to work for. And here I am. So it's been a blast.
Awesome. Well, Stu, it's been great. It's been great having you here. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you, everybody out there, just doing the work of making the world a better place and adopting these technologies and bringing them to bear for all the purposes that have come out in distributed computing and hybrid cloud. So thank you all very much for the work you've done. And Stu, I'm sure we'll see each other again very soon. So thank you again for coming on today. Any other parting statements before we go?
No, I'm not taking over your job, Chris. Thank you for doing it. Love the conversations. Definitely, there definitely will be some times that you and I will be collaborating on stuff. So
Absolutely.
I will be doing some more video. Yeah, it was nice. We got through almost an hour, and we
Yeah,
didn't even mention like my Twitter handle. I'm like the easiest guy to find on
I
Twitter.
know.
If
You're
they have
really easy to
feedback,
find.
I'm just Stu, STU on Twitter. So if you watch this far, please reach out. Happy to connect. Let me know your questions, and definitely great to always be engaged with the community. And by the way, Red Hat, we're hiring, so go check
Oh,
out the
a
job
lot.
boards. We have a
Yeah,
lot of hiring there, and we need. So if you love geeking out, you love the technology space, it's a fun place to work, and yeah, super excited that we've got more hiring to do.
absolutely. Yeah, redhat.com/jobs. Go get those go get those applications in, folks. We really need you. So good point. Thank you for mentioning that, Stu. And with that, I think we'll say goodbye. Uh, we'll see y'all on the air tomorrow for our KubeCon office hours that are still continuing, starting at 7 a.m. Eastern tomorrow, 1315 Central European Standard Time, because why not? So take it easy out there, stay safe, and we will see y'all next time.